The Radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, my technical problems continue. I don't know. I have no explanation. Don't know what's going on. I apologize. YouTube refused to connect to my scheduled show. I had to create a new show and send it to the new show. So I don't know. Who knows? Hopefully, it is not a permanent problem with YouTube and me. And this will not occur in the future. It's Juris says not a wrong book show if there's no technical problems. I guess I don't know. There was a run there where everything was going so smoothly, and then yesterday sucked, and then today we have it again. So it is what it is. We will overcome. And thank you for sticking around. I know some of you waited on Facebook and on Twitter for quite a while to actually see this, so waited patiently. So thank you for doing that. Let me just delete the other ones so people are not confused by it. Delete forever. Yes, I want it deleted forever. Delete forever. Okay, it's deleted. All right. So it was the travel. It must be the travel, the computer, YouTube. Everybody's not used to me. And now that I'm back, they're all, woof, they're fighting not to recognize me. Anyway, welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Sunday night, Labor Day weekend. I hope you're having a great weekend. I hope you have a lot of plans and relaxing and barbecuing. Or I'm sure Best Friend Hank is barbecuing. He'll tell us about the steaks in a little while. That generally everything is good with you guys. Things are good over here. Renovations in our new condo, haven't progressed at all because when we were gone, nothing was done. So, but today we laid out furniture and starting to resemble semi-normalcy over here. So we still don't have a kitchen. So the kitchen will probably only arrive in October. So we're looking, I think, at the end of the year before things are completely normal at the Brook household in terms of furniture and kitchen and everything else. I'm excited, though, that on Tuesday, my stereo system is coming in. So I've got a new receiver, AV receiver, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 speakers, 8 speakers, 7 speakers and a subwoofer, all being installed, and I am excited about that. So listening to music on a great pair of new speakers, Italian speakers, should be very, very, very enjoyable. So that'll be fun. All right, let's see. Oh, yeah, so did want to share with you that the last couple of days have seen some of the biggest declines in subscribers in Yaron Brook Show history. It turns out that I don't offend people only when I mention Trump. It turns out that I offend people even more when I speak about abortion. So a lot of people have unsubscribed to Yaron Brook Show because of my comments on abortion yesterday. That's fine. It's okay. If this is gonna be the issue, then so be it. Let's fight it out. We'll talk a little bit more about abortion later on the show. I'll also say that no, I'm not using Odyssey. I'm using ARC, Anthem Room Correction. So it's a different type of room correction software. Anyway, and I like room correction software. They're really good, particularly when you have a kind of a noisy room or a room that's not acoustically perfect. Just to remind everybody, I talked about this yesterday. I'm not going to. Starting from yesterday and today, and we'll see how long this goes. I'm not going to bug you about money during the show. I'm not going to talk about money. I'm not going to mention money. I'll mention the contributions coming in, primarily if there's no question associated with it. I'll thank you for that. And I will answer the Super Chat questions, and I encourage you to submit questions using the Super Chat. And remember that the more dollars you put with the Super Chat, the more likely it is, or the faster it is that I will answer your questions. So do that. I got paid by somebody not to bug you about money during the show. He felt that would make for a better show if I didn't do that. So we're trying that. We'll see. Yesterday was very successful. In spite of me not bugging you, you guys made it up to $800. Ali was ecstatic. So the prompting you, the suggesting, the please contribute to the Yaron Brook Show, that is left to Ali alone and to yourself. Remember, value for value, and if you get value from the show, please reflect that value back, or trade with me by supporting the show in financially. The best way to support the show is monthly. YaronBrookShow.com/support. You can also do it on Patreon, Subscribestar, and Locals. But those of you, and that's particularly good for the people who don't catch the show live, because those of you who are live, your funnest way to support the show is by doing the Super Chat and making the contributions live as I comment. That's more fun. It's energizing. And you get questions answered, which is great. Hopefully that is a value for you. Remember, the goal every day is $600. So I will not mention that again until the end of the show, right? Not mention it again till the end of the show. It's Ali's responsibility. All right. Again, apologize for the technical problems and all of that, but let's jump right in. So I got a question from one of our supporters. Well, it wasn't a question. He sponsored the show. He wanted to sponsor a show on cultural intelligence. We started this discussion a few weeks ago, but we never really got into it because we got distracted by a bunch of other things. So, Sam, thank you for the support. Really appreciate it. Let's jump in on cultural intelligence, and then after we finish our discussion, we'll wrap up with some talk about abortion, and of course, I will be answering your Super Chat questions. So what is cultural intelligence? I mean, cultural intelligence is a popular common term out there. It's related to emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is the ability of a human being to sense, or to get a sense, to understand and respond to the emotions being projected by people on the other side. So some people are very sensitive to the emotional state the person they are talking to is in, and that they can adjust how they present material, how they present context to that person, given that they sense the particular the particular emotional state. I'm not very good at, I guess, this what they call emotional. Now, let me just say, none of this is intelligence, right? Intelligence is how you respond. I don't know exactly what it is. This is your ability to tell from body language, from the way somebody talks, from the way they move, from the way they express themselves, their emotional state. And I don't know. I mean, that doesn't strike me as related to one's ability to do calculus, or one's ability to strategize or think strategically. So I don't really have a good sense of where exactly that comes from. Some people are very good at this and some people are not. Some people are very good at it, but then don't know how to respond to it. Some people are very good at it and know how to respond to it. The response side is where there's more cognition. Thank you, Jennifer. Really appreciate that. And cultural intelligence is similar in the sense that some people are very good or learn to be good at picking up on cultural cues, on adapting to that culture, or finding ways to deal with the culture in a productive, win-win kind of ability or attitude. Now, culture here does not just mean different cultures geographically, that is, different countries with different cultures. It could also mean different, for example, corporate cultures, and a lot of this cultural intelligence has to do with business. I mean, it almost all is related to the issue of business. Some of it's diplomacy, but it's not just diplomacy. It's one's ability to adapt to maybe a different culture than you're used to in business. Company A takes over Company B, and the two companies might have a completely different way of dealing with issues. For example, Company A, one company might be very open, very aggressive, very ambitious, encourage that in people, encourage that in the employees. Another culture might be less open. Criticizing other people is less acceptable, more polite. It could be that one culture compensates sales based on the number of deals, the number of dollars you bring in. Another culture might not give a lot of bonuses, but emphasize more salary. I mean, there might be a lot of different ways in which, depending on seniors, managers' preferences. Thank you, Wojtek. Really appreciate the support. Depending on senior managers and CEO and people at the top's attitudes and preferences, they might have just developed different. I mean, a simple one might be one company, I don't know, Silicon Valley company, might be casual all week. And another company, let's say New York, might not even have casual Fridays. That is, it's suit and tie every single day. I think there are fewer and fewer such companies in the world today. Suit and tie. But there are. And if Company A buys Company B, one of the challenges, indeed, one of the major challenges in being successful in a merger is being able to integrate cultures, in being able to understand the cultural differences, understand people's different expectations, find ways to communicate, bridge them, and bring them all together. One of Freeman says IBM used to have a culture of, was it blue suit, white tie, blue suit, white shirt, black tie, or red tie, I can't remember. But that used to be, if you went back to the 60s and 70s and 80s, that was the shtick at IBM. And IBM almost went bankrupt in the 1980s, and it had to change. And it had to change many things about the way it did business. It basically completely changed its business model. Instead of being primarily a producer of hardware, it became a service company. It became a consulting and service IT company. And the dress of people changed in order to be able to attract talent, in order to be able to fit into the environment of Silicon Valley. It completely changed. It brought in a CEO, if I remember right. Didn't it bring in a CEO from the tobacco industry? And he completely saved IBM. I mean, he completely did a strategic about-face, completely changed the business model, and saved IBM basically from extinction. You could have a company buy, I mean, Scott says something about wokeness. You could buy a company that has a woke culture where everybody talks politics and all day long, and they're all the same way. And if you bought a company like that, it would be very difficult. one of the reasons I think that kind of woke culture actually reduces the value of these companies, makes them less appealing to suitors, to people who want to buy them. An American company buying a British company, not only do you have these kind of attitudes, for example, with regard to dress, but you would have all kinds of differences. The way people greet each other. Americans are much more friendly, emotional, capable of hugging their coworkers. The Brits don't do that. And it seems strange. It seems weird. On the other hand, the French, hug you and kiss you on both cheeks. And some cultures hug you and kiss you on 3 cheeks. 1, 2, and then the cheek again. So there's no actual 3 cheeks. And it's kind of strange, uncomfortable, weird. So this idea that culture matters in this sense, and culture here, I mean, not in the sense of high culture, not in the sense of the achievements of a particular people or a particular country, but here I mean the behaviors, the mannerisms, the habits of a particular group of people. It could be within a business, the way in which a business is run. And you could say, as a rationalist objectivist would say, no. There's only one truth. There's only one way to run a company. There's only one appropriate, rational, whatever culture. But that's just not true. People are different. People relate to one another different. People are incentivized in different ways. And sometimes the founder of a company hires people to fit into a particular vision that he has, a particular culture that he wants to establish. And that you might have 2 different companies with 2 different cultures because they have 2 different personalities heading them. And they could both be unbelievably successful. So there is no cultural issues. No, Scott, that was not what I was arguing with Mackie. Really weird. So cultures are different because the people who start companies and the people who run companies and the people who manage companies are different. They have different attitudes, different emphases, different focuses, different sets of values. Now, if they're publicly run companies, they should all be maximizing shareholder wealth. That's their purpose. That's their reason for existence. That's what I was arguing with Mackie about, Scott. But how they get there, there are a variety of different paths on how to get there. If you're a publicly traded company, your fiduciary, legal, moral obligation is to place shareholders first and to maximize their wealth. That is true. But there are lots of different ways to do that. And the best way to do that at the end of the day at the end of the day, comments sometimes distract me. Having a culture that is appropriate to senior managers' values and focus it is going to be worth maximizing, is going to drive to maximize shareholder wealth. Having a culture that is inappropriate to managers is going to do the opposite. So culture matters. And when there are cultural clashes, they matter. Most mergers, most large mergers, fail. Most mergers land up being money-losing propositions. And the reason for that is not that the synergies on paper don't actually exist. They usually do. It usually has to do with the inability to integrate the 2 businesses. Not in theory, not from the perspective of being able to see how the businesses fit and how they reinforce each other. But almost all business mergers fail because the inability to integrate cultures. Because one culture rejects the other. Because people can't work well together. Because they don't understand each other, they can't communicate with one another. Because they resent one another for a variety of reasons. Because the incentive structures are not aligned, or people are used to different incentive structures. And you can go back into the history of mergers and acquisitions, and you can see how few mergers have been overwhelming successes. Very few. Very, very few. And that's reflected often in stock prices. Stock prices. Now, this is true even within the same country. But it's also true, even more so true, across borders. One of the reasons companies often don't buy companies overseas, but rather subcontract with companies overseas, is because it's much easier to let, Chinese managers manage Chinese people, create the right kind of culture and incentives for them. Same with Japanese or Koreans or Germans or British or French. But we live in a world which is becoming more and more and more connected, or at least was until recently. And connection is incredibly powerful. The more we're connected, the more leverage there is. The more there is the potential for good ideas to arise. The more minds there are to bounce ideas off. The more people there are to innovate, to take ideas to the next step, to collaborate with. I mean, the globe has opened up for collaboration, for trade, for innovation, for progress, for ingenuity. So, connection, the ability to communicate, the ability to work with people all over the world is a massive competitive advantage today. Supply chains, the iPhone, this iPhone, is made of, I can't remember, I think it's 60-something different countries. Companies in different countries produce stuff that goes into this. There's certain minerals from Africa, there's chips from Taiwan and Korea, stuff from China, technologies from Europe, all are integrated because of the world in which we live, which is amazingly integrated through trade, but integrated through the internet, integrated through telecommunications. And therefore, we have this amazing ability to leverage the resources of people all over the world. People will sometimes never meet. Often will never meet. And as a consequence, to be successful in business requires more and more communication with, cutting deals with, cooperating with, working with people from all over the world. People who have vastly different ways of doing things than we do. Just, different habits, different expressions, different ways of dealing with the world. So, it's important. It's important to figure out how to deal with that. If you come at there, if you approach it as there's only one way to do things, it's my way, and I'm going to ignore the other person's culture, you're just not going to get very far. You're not going to be successful. You're not going to be able to take advantage of the immense potential that exists because of connection, because of the connectivity, the global connectivity that exists today. If you're offended by the way other people behave, even when it's not meant to offend, it doesn't make, again, you have a comparative disadvantage. So being able to work across cultures, being able to communicate across cultures, being able to find common ground with people who are very different than you is a comparative advantage in business. Now, it might ultimately be that your way is the right way. But the way to move forward with that is to teach people. It's to educate people. It's to help them see that their ways are wrong. So this idea of being able to communicate and collaborate is not some form of multiculturalism that asserts that all cultures are equal. All cultures are not equal. Some cultures are better, some cultures are worse. Certainly from the perspective of human flourishing, but also in business. Some CEOs are brilliant at creating profitable cultures, cultures that produce results, cultures that are creative, cultures that promote innovation, entrepreneurship, promote making money. And others are not. Some cultures around the world promote honesty and integrity and, you make a deal on a handshake. Other cultures, you know that the most lawyered up contract will not help you. They're going to take you for all you want. And in all those cases, you need to know that. You might sit in a meeting with a bunch of Israelis and they'll criticize you like hell. They'll tell you you're full of shit. And a lot of people get super insulted. But this is how we grow up. We argue. We tell people what we think. We actually debate. We don't whitewash. We don't say when we don't like something. You know how Americans deal with not wanting when they don't like something? What do Americans say when they don't like something? What do you guys think? What do Americans typically say in a conversation when you ask them what do you think and they don't really like it? What do they say? They usually say, it's interesting. Whenever an American says something's interesting, it's not. Not always, but often. Right? Israelis say, it sucks. It's nonsense. It's no good. Right? Other cultures won't say anything. Yeah, interesting is ambiguous, purposefully ambiguous. They won't tell you because they don't want to say a negative. So they just say something ambiguous. They don't want to lie in saying something positive when they think it's negative. So they say something ambiguous. Other cultures don't. So different cultures deal with that differently, and it's important for you to know because so you're not surprised, so you know what to expect, so you know whether you're getting the truth from somebody. And a lot of that is going to be dictated by the cultural norms where they live. Americans are super warm and they go to Scandinavia and everybody's super cold. And you might think, ooh, they don't like me. They don't agree with me. No, it's just the way they are. Just the way they are. Thanks, Kevin. Really appreciate it. There's a huge difference, for example, between how the Japanese deal with things and how the Chinese deal with it. Chinese are much more like Israelis. They'll yell at you and tell you what they want. The Japanese are much more, they're polite, they'll listen, and then they'll tell you in a very polite way what they actually think. Jennifer asks, can there be a way to say it sucks in a tactful way? Yeah, I mean, there's always a way to say it, but sometimes, you also have to consider how important is tact to you. So I don't think it's very good. It doesn't serve the purpose that we intended for it. I just don't see it. What's the point of this exact? I don't know. It depends on the exact thing, but yes, there's always a way. I mean, it sucks is, not exactly a tactful way to say things, but there are ways to say it tactfully. Some people in some cultures don't use tact, but then you have to see it not as being rude, not as them attacking you. First of all, generally in life, you have to be able to separate criticism from you. If somebody's criticizing a work, a thing, even something you did, doesn't mean they're criticizing you, right? You might be wrong. I've said this before. My attitude towards criticism is, if you criticize me, if you're right, thank you. And if you're wrong, that's your problem. Why is it mine? So you can't let criticism derail you. Casperanza, thank you. Really appreciate the support. Wow, we've got somebody here, Aimbotical. He says, I love your work. I used to be a Vosh guy. Yes. Made my day. Thank you. That's terrific. We've converted somebody from the other side. That's great. That's what we do this for. So I don't like the term cultural intelligence, but it's capturing something real. I've also seen on different websites, they give different tools and different criteria. I mean, my view is you've got to read up a little bit on a culture before you engage with it. You've got to learn it, and then you've got to be sensitive when you're there to how they're behaving and what they're doing. I don't think it's helpful to categorize them all, to put them into boxes and to pretend. You've got to be you. And some of us are better at adapting. Some of us are not as good. But you've got to at least make an effort to understand what is going on the other side. To understand the extent of which what they're saying, you understand what it is exactly that they're saying, what message they're actually conveying to you. So it's important to be objective. That is, look at the facts within the context of the situation, in the context of where you are, who you're talking to. And as a consequence, you got to study up a little bit in advance before you go somewhere. And that's good to do as a tourist as well, because you'll encounter all kinds of things. You want to understand it. And yeah, you can judge them. You can say, in China, corruption is rampant. And partially it's because of, the revolution out of communism. Partially it's because it's a culture of pragmatism. And a culture of pragmatism is a culture that says anything goes. Anything goes. As long as I get my aim, everything's allowed. Don't let moral ideals stop you from getting where you want to be. So for them, lying, cheating, and corruption can be legit. And they do it. And you have to be aware of that, and you have to deal with it and find ways to protect yourself from it. Right? And do it without being, what is it? Just treating them as Romites, because they're going to be exceptions. They're obviously exceptions. Successful businessmen in China don't lie, steal, and cheat. It doesn't work long term, even in China. So you have to be able to adapt. You have to be willing to adapt, able to adapt, sensitive to the need to adapt, sensitive to the circumstances, the context in which you find yourself. You know, just a simple one. In India, my understanding is, I mean, Indians I've met, when they want to say yes, they shake their head. And it's like, it's completely disorienting. Because they're saying yes, but they're doing no with their head. And when they go like this, it might mean no, it might mean, it's just very confusing. And if you're just encountering that and you don't know what to expect and you're just going there for the first time and trying to do business there, it's very confusing. This is what I'd suggest to young people entering business. You've got to be sensitive to the culture of the place where you're working. What are the expectations? What do they want from you? And if you find it rational, you adapt. If you find it irrational, you probably should leave. But adapt. Fit in. Fit in, I mean, within the culture in terms of that's how you be successful in the organization. If it's a culture that is bad, then leave. Don't stay in a business where the culture is terrible. It'll eat you up. It'll destroy you from the inside. It will make it impossible for you to be successful. And as you interact with other companies, don't assume they have the same culture you do. Be adaptable. Be mindful of the fact that other people have different ways of doing things. And that is certainly true as you venture overseas. Be mindful, educate yourself, think, and be alert. Be alert to differences. Be alert to signals that they might not be understanding you right, that you might have to say it differently or again, or repeat yourself. So, this idea of cultural intelligence, well, again, I don't like the term, and why I think a lot of the articles I've read about it seem to be a little shallow and maybe, or not shallow, they consultants, business consultants like to put things in little boxes, you know, what is it, Myers-Briggs, everything has to be in a box. You have 4 characteristics. Everything about you is defined by 4 characteristics, and we just fit you into these 4 characteristics. So it's definitely necessary to be sensitive to these things. All right, let's see. All right, some $20 questions, but we'll start with ones with questions generally that are on the topic. Let's see. What does the German business culture say when they're not interested? You know, I don't know, but I think Germans can be pretty direct. They often don't express emotions much. They're kind of flat. It's hard to read them emotionally. But if you listen to them, what they say, they mean. They tell you what they think. So Germans don't tend to beat around the bush. They don't tell. So if they're not interested, I think they just say they're not interested. I think that's right. If somebody has more experience with German business culture, let me know if I'm wrong. But it strikes me that Germans, if they think something's not a good idea, they'll tell you. They'll tell you in a nice way, and they'll tell you without anger, without expression. But Germans, as Trading Journey says, Germans don't sugarcoat anything. They just tell you, but it's in a very stoic, non-emotional way. Just like their efficiency. Let's see. All right, Scott, is the value gained from cultural intelligence applicable to working with others in the liberty movement and not too quickly dismissing them? Yeah, I mean, it's gained. in interaction with anybody across that you're not familiar with any kind of different organization or different place. If there's a hidden criticism there, Scott, you're going to have to be more explicit. But yes, you can't expect other people who might have not heard Ayn Rand to accept her implicitly. You might, or whoever heard Ayn Rand, but who just don't agree with her. You can't just accept them, or who just have a different way of doing things. It doesn't mean they're not wrong, and it doesn't mean that ultimately you can't come to the point where you do criticize them. But you can't quickly dismiss people. Generally, you have to take into account context, level of knowledge, what they know, what they don't know, and all those kind of things. So yes, don't dismiss people offhand too quickly. Got to gain knowledge, got to gain information, got to understand before you make a judgment call. All right, let's see some other $20 questions. Abba lives, the world will be saved. It turns out that Abba has reunited for, I guess, a series of concerts, or one concert, or a few concerts. I don't know how many concerts, but we've got a Abba concerts going on. God. Proper. Do you believe people that claim that psychedelics have helped them innovate or make good career moves, or they tripped on LSD and it gave them positive changes in their mindset? Are they just rationalizing getting high? No, I mean, I can believe it in the sense that, there is chemicals do play an important role in our brain. And there's no question that certain attitudes get codified, if you will, chemically inside our brain. Depression and certain mental issues and problems manifest themselves in a certain rigidity of pathways in the brain, certain rigidity in ways of thinking about things. And it turns out that it's possible that LSD mushrooms, I don't know. I mean, the research is new and the research is only happening right now, but that those psychedelics shake things up to some extent. They loosens the constraints. So, for example, there seems to be research that LSD has interesting effects on depression, on schizophrenia, on mental illness. It has to be guided by a psychiatrist. It has to be the right dose. It has to be in the right kind of environment. It has to be matched with certain cognitive psychological treatment. It can't just be we zap you with a chemical and everything turns out okay. Now, do I believe that they helped them innovate or make good career moves? It could be that what it does is, again, loosen up things. Some people get too rigid in the way they think. But I don't recommend it for getting innovative ideas and career moves. It's like sometimes you wake up in the morning with a great idea. You've struggled with the problem, and you wake up in the morning and go, yeah, that's the solution. And it's like in the background, your subconscious, making connections and the logical connections are in place when you wake up in the morning. And maybe dreaming has something to do with it. Maybe dreaming in some way loosens these things up. I don't know how it works exactly. I'm not sure anybody does. It could be that LSD does something like that. What it doesn't do is reveal the truth to you. What it doesn't do is present reality as it really is to you. That would be pretty destructive for the human race if we could only see reality when we were on LSD. All right. It's just like alcohol. Alcohol, why do Americans and Northern Europeans drink so much? I've talked about this, I think, in the past. It's primarily because, Americans and Northern Europeans and many people who come from a Christian background are emotionally repressed. And alcohol does something to you that loosens that up, that allows you to express yourself. It somehow circumvents the repressive parts of the brain. And it could be that there are certain repressive parts of the brain with regard to ideas, or with regard to depression, or with regard to certain psychological issues that LSD can loosen up. But again, I wouldn't do it unless it was under the supervision of somebody who knew exactly what they were doing, right? And it could be the same with weed, although I don't know. I mean, obviously, alcohol has effects on the brain. You would think that a lot of chemicals have effect on the brain, on the effect on your behavior, on the effect of the connection to your emotions. Part of this idea that Americans say, oh, it's interesting, when they hate something, that's repression. When they're drunk, they tell you what they think, which is kind of sad. I wish they'd just say what they think when they're not drunk. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of research on psychedelics right now. It's the in thing. Silicon Valley loves it. Everybody's talking about it. We'll see what the research leads to us. Unfortunately, because LSD was made illegal in the 1971, maybe it was illegal even before that in the late 1960s, a lot of the research that was being done by people like Timothy Leary and others into the effects of LSD and other psychedelics and their potential therapeutic impacts, that was never fulfilled. The promise of that was never fulfilled. All that research stopped. So, I do not advise, I do not suggest, I do not think it makes sense to use drugs recreationally. But if it turns out that psychedelics can help people who are depressed, or can help people who are schizophrenic, all the power to them, right? All the power to them. The Beatles did LSD. I'm not sure that's why they were so good and so productive. All right, let's see, that was all the $20 questions we had. All right, so, all right, let's talk a little bit more about abortion. I know this is a topic that many of you hate me on, and obviously a lot of people have unsubscribed over the last 2 days because of my views on abortion. But my views on abortion are not going to change because you're unsubscribing. It just shows how people in all parts of the political spectrum have an intolerance to listen to, hear, debate ideas they disagree with. So I am a supporter of abortion. I think abortion is the availability of legal, safe abortion is a good thing. I also think sex is amazing, and I'm pro-sex. I think you should be careful when you have sex, so there are venereal diseases and all kinds of other things, so wearing a condom is a good idea no matter what. There's no reason to get pregnant, so using contraception should be, everybody should do it. Getting pregnant and aborting a fetus is not a pleasant thing. It's a medical procedure. You want to avoid medical procedures, even relatively trivial ones. So I'm all for contraception. I'm all for sex. And I also recognize that accidents happen, that people get pregnant while they're not trying to get pregnant, and that the availability of abortions in order to not have to have a baby when you don't want a baby is a good thing, an unmitigated good. Now, there is the issue of individual rights. But what are individual rights? Individual rights are not God-given. They're not something that exists within you. They're not created. They don't come into existence when a sperm meets an egg. Individual rights are freedoms. They're a recognition that you are free, autonomous being. That coercion should not be applied to you as a free, autonomous, rational being. It's not about it's not about life. It's about being human with everything that entails. And primarily what that entails is a mind. And a mind that's active. And being a human being. Now, I say abortion should be legal until birth. Now, why do I say that? Well, because birth is an unequivocal change between two states. The state of being inside a woman to the state of being an individuated, separate entity. That is the dividing line. Now, I don't think that abortion in the 9th month are moral. They strike me as involving evasion, again, unless the life of the mother requires it, or the fetus is so deformed that its life would be horror. But there's a difference between morality and legality. The state has no right to intervene unless somebody's rights are being violated. But a fetus has no rights. Again, right is not a spark. It's not something that enters the body when God sends it down. Chad, thank you. Really appreciate the support. And thanks for sponsoring the cultural intelligence topic. I hope it was helpful. I hope what I said was helpful. Rights are something that you gain as a separate, individuated human being in a social context. Not in every context. Do you have rights? Are rights even meaningful? One of my objections to anarchy is that in anarchy there are no rights. It's meaningless to talk about rights. On a desert island, alone, there are no rights. Or even with just 2 or 3 people, there's no such thing as rights. So rights are something that are formed when a society is formed. The rights are not formed, but the rights are recognized. The rights are meaningful. Rights gain meaning in the context of the forming of a society with a governing entity that protects those rights. It's not a concept that applies to fetuses. It's not a concept that applies to a potential baby inside the womb of a woman. Rights are not there to defend you against an omnipresent government. Rights are there to defend you against your neighbor. And the government's job is to protect your rights. So let's be clear, there's no rights violation in abortion. Now, again, morality is a different question. Why is the woman doing this? Again, for objectivism. The moral is the rational. The immoral is the irrational. If the woman is just being irrational, if she's an emotionalist, then it might be immoral. But that's not the business of the state. The state's involvement is limited to only the issue of, is a right being violated or not? Whose rights? Now, clearly the woman has rights to her own body, to her life, to her future, and to taking the steps necessary based on her judgment, her reason, to live in this world. She has rights, and it's the state's job to protect those rights. And therefore, if she decides to have an abortion, it is none of the state's business, unless somebody's trying to stop her from having an abortion, and then the state must intervene if they're trying to stop her violently to protect her right to have an abortion. So this is not an issue. Now, let me address for a minute the constitutionality issue. A lot of people say the Roe versus Wade was badly argued. And that's probably true. Roe is probably not the best argued Supreme Court decision. But that's not new. Almost every decision the Supreme Court passes down, whether one I agree with or one I disagree with, is usually badly argued. Because what the Supreme Court hasn't had for 100 years, or maybe 200 years, is a proper conception of rights, of individual rights. And indeed, the Constitution is not clear enough about the role of government, about the limitations of government, about the fact that government responsibility is the protection of rights. It's in the Declaration of Independence, but very few have seen the connection between the Declaration and the Constitution. People like Scalia believed that rights were nonsense on stilts, quoting Bentham. He was an originalist, but he didn't believe in rights. He was an originalist because that was the founding document, and you have to follow the founding document. Not because it was profound, moral, based on a conception of individual rights. So, the woman has a right to do whatever she wants with her body. That's the only issue here. There is no issue of a fetus having rights. And I don't see the issue. I don't see how I could be anti-abortion and be pro-limited government and pro-morality and pro-life. Indeed, the pro-life position is a pro-abortion position. I don't like the pro-choice stuff. That's a sellout. I'm pro-abortion. Of course, it's her body. It's her body. It's part of her. It's an entity that is inside of her. She gets to decide whether that entity gets extracted from her body or not. Right. I see I'm going to lose more subscribers now. Thank you, Apollo. Thank you for the support. Now, the Constitution, in defending rights, must defend the mother's rights, the right to a body. Now, by this logic, prostitution should be legal. By this logic, use of drugs should be legal. By this logic, there should be no FDA, or no FDA with the kind of authority that it has. Birth. So, yeah, your body is yours to do with as you wish. And if you do not want to wish to carry an embryo, then you shouldn't have to carry that embryo. Almost all abortions are done in the first 2 trimesters. The first 2 trimesters, there's no mind, there's no cognition, there's no perception, there's no human being. There's really no issue. Thank you, Fab006. Really appreciate it. So I don't understand the anti-abortion perspective. It confuses a potentiality, the potential human being, with a real human being. The mother is actual human being. There's a difference between potential and actual. It's an important one. Finally, some people say, well, there should be a states' rights issue. And I disagree. First of all, states don't have rights. States are sovereign only within the context of protecting individual rights. But when states violate rights, it is the job, the responsibility, and authority of the federal government to stop them from doing so. In that sense, it was right to stop slavery. It was right to stop Jim Crow laws, for the federal government to step in and say, you cannot do that. You are violating individual rights, and that is outside of your authority as a state. States can only vary, can only manifest their sovereignty in those realms where they're not violating rights. Now, granted, all the states today are violating rights. Okay, that's no reason to add more. So, abortion should be protected at the federal level because banning abortion is violating rights. Think about it the reverse. Let's assume the anti-abortion position is correct. Let's assume that abortion is what people think it is, some people think it is, murder. And let's say some states say, we're okay with murder. Do you think the federal government should just stand by and say, fine? What if they extend the murder to, I don't know, anybody under the age of 10 or anybody over the age of 70? It's okay to kill them. We won't try you for murder. Should the federal government step in? Should the federal government do something? Absolutely. Otherwise, we're not one country and we're not a civilized country. John, thank you. Really appreciate the support. So it's absolutely the case that the federal government should intervene when rights are being violated. And why is my body, my choice irrelevant? It's the only relevant thing here. So the federal government should intervene. States' rights do not apply here. This is not about federalism. This is about rights. The question is not, is it human? I addressed that earlier. The question is it individual human being? Is it separated? Does it have rights? And it doesn't. Rights don't apply. The Fed should intervene where the Constitution requires them. What about if the Constitution's wrong? But the Constitution, properly understood, requires them. So if the Constitution doesn't require, for example, the Feds to intervene in the case of slavery, so should the Feds have intervened in the case of slavery? I guess not. What the hell? Constitution doesn't require them to intervene if a state decides not to prosecute people for murder. I don't think the Constitution requires the Fed to intervene. Should it? Yes, of course. That's what it means. So, yeah, I'm all for changing the Constitution, rewriting it, making it better, but I don't think you have the right interpretation of the Constitution. Constitution is not just a legal document that manifests only the responsibilities of government in a sense of the details. It doesn't have every contingency, every possibility. The Constitution is there to protect and defend the individual rights of the citizens. And when those rights are being violated, it is the government's job to protect them, even if those rights were not manifest in the Constitution in writing when it was written. It's exactly the point Madison made. The point Madison made was, yeah, it was a big mistake that they allowed for slavery, and it was a big mistake they didn't go to war much earlier than they did. Madison was very clear that the problem with the Bill of Rights was that it articulated rights, But there were many, many more rights that were not in the Bill of Rights, and that he feared that people would think that the federal government should only protect these rights in the Bill of Rights. And he's explicit in the Federalist Papers. You should read your history, guys. He's explicit about, no, the federal government is there to protect individual rights, all rights. These are some as examples that we put together in the Bill of Rights. But they're not the totality of rights that the federal government should protect. That's exactly what the Ninth Amendment is supposed to take care of. Indeed, if I were ruling on abortion, I would use the Ninth Amendment. You guys have, Richard, you really don't understand the Constitution. Read James Madison. Read the Federalist Papers. Read the history of the Constitution. And read the Ninth Amendment. The Ninth Amendment is exactly that amendment that is supposed to, and it's being ignored by the courts. But the Ninth Amendment is the amendment that basically says that, yeah, we realize that there are many more rights that are not being articulated in this document that the federal government is responsible for protecting. And under the Ninth Amendment, instead of creating a right to privacy, what they should have done is just use the Ninth Amendment to protect the woman's right to her life. That's the constitutional basis. You cannot read the product free of its intentions. You cannot understand what was written in any document in all of human history without understanding the context in which it was written, without understanding the intentions. That's part of the problem with originalism. Originalism is better because originalism looks at the context and the intentions. Textualism is nuts because you can't understand the text without understanding the context of the time. All right. Shazbot writes, Penn Jillette proposed an abortion policy which prohibits abortion after the embryo's brain starts functioning, not as a compromise, but as a symmetry with the definition of the end of life, brain death. Thoughts? I mean, if you're going to have a cutoff date, that would be the one, not heartbeat. That is absurd and ridiculous. Not conception. That is just mystical nonsense. But no, I don't like it because... And the fact is that if you did that, that is almost no abortions happen afterwards. But it's wrong because, again, it is a misunderstanding of what rights relate to. Rights do not relate to when does the brain start functioning. Rights relate to when do you become an individuated human being. And that happens at birth. And if you don't understand the issue of birth, then you don't have eyes. There's a pregnant woman before, and then there's a woman and a baby. That's the event that matters. That's the fundamental separation. That's the fundamental distinction. Everything else is marginal. So I don't think, and by the way, it was great meeting you at the conference, Shazbot. Am I caught up? No, I got a question for Shazbot. You wanted me to review a particular episode of Star Trek. Can you let me know where I can watch it? Is there somewhere where you can watch episodes of Star Trek for free or not for free? I don't mind paying for it. But where can I get a copy of that particular episode of Star Trek? I've seen some versions on like YouTube, but I'm just not sure how trustworthy they are. I want to make sure I'm getting something that's legit in terms of the copyright and also quality, so I can see the whole thing. Netflix has Star Trek. Jackson, thanks for the support. Really appreciate it. Bree says the only way to allow abortion federally and to overturn Roe is to give people an absolute right to have no interference in healthcare. This is what both sides are scared of and has nothing to do with abortion. I mean, I agree with that, although I do think the two issues are separate. The arguments are very different in terms of healthcare. But yes, I mean, the left, if if the left wasn't the left, if the left was actually freedom, then the left would argue for no intervention, federal or state, in healthcare. And the problem is that the right doesn't define abortion as healthcare. The right defines abortion as murder. Zalmi, thank you. Really appreciate that. And therefore, it doesn't fall under healthcare for the right. For the right, it falls under criminal law. Thomas asks, these are all 20 plus questions, $20 plus. Which episode? I have it written down here. It was, whoops, maybe not. Measure of a Man. It was the episode of Measure of the Man, Star Trek The Next Generation, Season 2, Episode 9. That's the one that Charles Bott asked me to review. Thomas says, Ninth Amendment, man. Robert Bork, quote, Ninth Amendment is an ink blot on the Constitution. Keep up the good work. Yes, Robert Bork was one of the most awful judicial nominees for the Supreme Court ever. I'm so glad he didn't get in. I mean, unfortunately, many conservatives are influenced by Bork, right? So, yes, the Ninth Amendment is crucial here. Oh, give me a break, Richard. That's dumb. You deliver one by C-section. You deliver babies by C-section. Yes, because a mother wants to deliver a child. At that point, she's made the decision. That's why you have a C-section. But people don't have abortions in that late because doctors don't want to do it. Because it's an unbelievably unpleasant procedure, because it's incredibly risky. If you've ever been in a C-section, I have, at a C-section, it's not an easy procedure. It takes a while to recover from. I have read Robert Bork, and Robert Bork is a pragmatist. The idea that Robert Bork is a good justice is nonsense. He's not. He's the worst kind of conservative judge. And I'm super happy he was not chosen to be in the Supreme Court. I mean, the other conservatives in the Supreme Court are far better than he is. Unfortunately, they are more and more and more inclined to be like him. Again, Scalia is a good example, who didn't believe in individual rights, in spite of the fact that he is referred to as the guy. All right, let's see. So we got a bunch of other questions. Let's see. What do you think on the issue of parental consent for underage abortions? I mean, I think it's a tricky issue. I don't think. I mean, it's tricky because of the culture we live in. It shouldn't be, because parents should support the decision of an underage girl to have an abortion, because why would you load an underage girl with a child? Why would you want her to go through with a pregnancy? So I support not having parental consent, but it's a tricky issue. I don't think it's an issue that is easy to deal with. Because you demand parental consent on almost every other important decision an underage child does. And there would have to be in the law, and it would be tricky. There would have to be in the law maybe a child would have to go in front of a judge to convince the judge that they were making a rational decision in the absence of parental. So you would have to give the child an out. If you required parental consent, you would have to give the child out if his parents were religious fanatics or didn't have the child's best interest in mind, and that the child the young person could convince the judge that they were making a rational, informed decision. So there would have to be an out in the law relating to it, which I think would be true of other things. I mean, imagine, I don't know, certain child prodigies having the ability to sign big contracts and they wanting to take on the responsibility of it. They would be able to have a way out of parental consent and parental need for us to sign off on stuff, depending on their age and depending on their level of maturity. Okay, so we have 5 more questions. You can continue to ask questions. The Super Chat is open. I will remind you, the Super Chat questions of $20 or more will be answered immediately. Others, I will try to get you throughout at the end of the show. Also, I'll remind you that we are, I'll just say it, we're about 250 short of our goal. So appreciate any support that you might be able to provide. I hope that's okay, Ron. It's at the end of the show, or close to the end of the show. Anyway, I'm not going to mention it again until the very end of the show. But ask questions and use the Super Chat to do it. Michael asks, can you clarify what you meant when you said the senses come before science? Yes, I mean, observation comes first. First, you have to observe phenomena in reality. Only then can you create a theory, a hypothesis about why what is happening, i.e. science. And then you test your hypothesis back in reality. But it is not true that science begins with hypothesis, just out of nowhere. An idea struck me. And that the whole point of science is testing. Irrefutability, or whatever. No. The first act of a scientist is induction. It's looking at reality and inducing from reality, from observation, a hypothesis, a theory, an explanation, and then trying to prove that that explanation is real. So everything, all knowledge, there is no knowledge. Human beings have no knowledge without senses. The senses is where it all begins. The senses is, if we go back to a child doesn't have a concept of chair, of mother, of any of that until he opens his eyes and looks and sees. So it's in feels and touches and hears. The sense is the beginning point of all knowledge. There is no knowledge without sense perception. No knowledge without sense perception. Shazbot, I discussed in vitro fertilization with anti-abortion commenters, and they are opposed to this as well. In vitro fertilization with anti-abortion. Wow. Especially since there are often extra embryos created which get discarded after the good ones are utilized by the woman. Anti-everything. Shazbot, first of all, thank you for the support. You've been very generous today, so I appreciate that. But yes, I mean, look, the anti-abortion right is anti-life. It's anti-progress. It's anti-happiness. It's anti the individual. To be against in vitro fertilization is to be anti-life that a woman chooses to have. Chooses to have. I mean, it's the same thing with stem cell research, right? That Bush Jr. banned stem cell research because it was, embryos that were created in a tube that were going to be trashed anyway. But God forbid you use that tissue to create stem cells and you do research on it. Because what? These embryos have the spark of life. They have God. Zalmi, thank you for the support. It's complete nonsense. And for the federal government to ban, Where does the federal government have, where in the Constitution does it say the federal government has the right to ban stem cell research? So, no, I mean, it really is an anti-life, anti-science, anti-prosperity position. And we're talking about the radicals, the people who go all in, the people who try to be consistent about these things. But those are the people who count. Those are the people who go out there and actually move the needle. Move the needle. So stem cell research of embryos was not funded. Yes, the federal government has a right to ban slavery. And the federal government has a right to do a lot of things that are not explicitly stated in the Constitution. All right. Let's see. Hiram is telling someone, quote, someone who is your friend or at least cares about you would never encourage you to do something that could potentially get you hurt or in trouble. Sound tact. Is telling someone, quote, someone is your friend or at least cares about you would never encourage you to do something that could potentially get you hurt or in trouble. No, I think that's right. If somebody really cares about you, they would never encourage you to hurt yourself. So I think that's tactful. You'd have to give more of a context to know whether that is tactful, tacky, obvious, what you're trying to gain, what is the issue at hand. So you'd have to give a lot more context to decide whether that was sound or not. All right, down to the last three questions. Does capitalism in its purest form inevitably leverage an aspect, who you know that matters, closed circles of people, of crony capitalism thoughts? No, I mean, I don't know why that would happen, right? So, who you know matters in life. I mean, it just does. But that's true in life, in any system. But who you know doesn't give you power over other people. Zalmi, thank you. Appreciate it. Zalmi trickles it in. Lots of small contributions that add up to significant contributions. So I thank him a lot because he trickles them in a lot. I would love to debate Ben Shapiro on abortion. I'd whip him. I have no doubt in my mind. I don't think Ben Shapiro would want to debate me on abortion. He had an opportunity. He interviewed me. He could have brought up abortion. Indeed, we talked about it afterwards. I said, next time you interview me, let's do some stuff we disagree about, like abortion. So it's in his court. His court. Yeah, I mean, Ben Shapiro would get more jabs in. He'd get more, he's cleverer. But in terms of actual philosophical issue, I'll debate anybody. There's no issue here. Philosophically, this is a slam dunk. And the fact is, he didn't raise it when he interviewed me. He could have. I was completely available. So I don't think capitalism, I mean, of course, who you know matters. But cronyism is about who you know that can inflict power, force, the gun, the state on you. That's what cronyism is. Cronyism is not about, I know people so I can get hired more easily, or I know people so I can cut a deal in a better way. None of that is fundamentally cronyism. Cronyism is about the government writing laws and regulations and treating different companies different ways because of the influence. That would not exist under capitalism. because there would be a separation of state from economics. Another way in which the Constitution should be changed. And the Constitution, since they don't abide by it anyway, it's gone. We need a new one, written from scratch, but not by anybody alive today. Anybody alive with power today, anyway. Michael asked, don't criminals have some rights? The guards can't just beat them or starve them into them. Yes, they have some rights, but their rights are limited. And the fact that the guards can't beat them up doesn't necessarily relate to the rights that they have. It relates to justice. So you don't want to give guards arbitrary power. But criminals do have some rights, depending on how bad their offense was. But the reason the death penalty is reasonable, the reason the death penalty is not a violation of rights is because the person being put to death, if they committed murder, has no right to his own life, which means he has no rights. That still doesn't mean the guard should beat him up. It still doesn't mean he should be tortured. But that's not for the sake of the rights of the murderer. That's because you don't want to give prison guards arbitrary power because of the people, the innocent people who might be hurt by that, because of the people who maybe are lesser criminals who might be hurt by that, and because of what it does to the system or what it does to the guard. Right? It has nothing to do with the Constitution. We're not talking about the Constitution. We're talking about what's right. The Constitution might be right, the Constitution might be wrong. We're not talking here about what's constitutionally feasible. The reason you don't beat guards, you don't beat prisoners up is not because the Constitution says you shouldn't. It's because it's wrong. And the Constitution happens to be right on this issue. I'm not a lawyer debating the Constitution. That's not the point of the show. So it's wrong for them to do it. It's unjust for them to do it. But that's, again, murderers don't have rights. They have no rights, zero. That's why you can kill them. Dave asks, $2 Dave. No, Dave is incredibly generous. Most of the time. Is dating single moms a bad idea? No, I don't know why. Why would it be a bad idea? I mean, if she's somebody you want to date, if she's interesting, if she's, if you find her intriguing, if she shares values with you, if the fact that she's a single mom in and of itself should not be a black mark. That would be ridiculous. You might lose out on some of the best possible women out there. So, absolutely not. All right. Robert has the final question, unless somebody jumps in. But if you jump in, you should jump in with $20. Right. Robert says, I loathe the topic, and yet it's crucially important. Thank you for doing the hard and all often thankless work. Yes, it's very thankless. I appreciate it. I appreciate your thank you. Given this thankless topic. It's very much a thankless topic, and one that generates unsubscribers, which is not good on the YouTube algorithm. But anyway, the truth is the truth, and I will not shun the truth, even when it's not popular, as I've proven over and over again over the last few years. So thank you, Robert. Really appreciate it. Pro-abortion is pro-life. Absolutely. That's what Robert said. And I agree. All right. Don't forget to like the show before you leave, if you liked it. A lot of thumbs down, like yesterday. Lots of thumbs down. It's not an issue. Edge cases don't define the issue. I'm happy to engage on edge cases, but they don't define anything. Edge cases are edge cases. Everything has an edge case. In life is full of edge cases. Okay, so what? That doesn't mean they're on principles. Richard, you're going to have to do better. You're going to have to do better. You're going to have to become less legalistic, less formalistic, and anyway. Another thumbs down. All right. But those of you who like the show, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Those of you who would like to support the show, who see value in the show, you can still make a Super Chat contribution here quickly to get us to Alejandrina's goal of 600. We made it to around 415, so there's still about 185 left to go. So if you'd like to help us get to that goal, you can do so right now on the Super Chat. But more importantly, the way to support the show, particularly if you're not watching or listening live, is to become a monthly contributor. You can do so on Patreon. More and more people are subscribing on Patreon, and it's a great platform to support the show. You can do so on Subscribestar, which was an alternative to Patreon, but Patreon kind of went crazy. And you can do so on Locals, Dave Rubin's platform. So Locals, Subscribestar, Patreon, and of course you can do so on YuranBookShow.com/support. Ragnar of the Desert has just cut this, has just put in $92.09, which puts us at, what is it, 500, I think? Something like that. I don't know. I can't do the math in my head. Then Frank has contributed $50 for me fighting. Thank you, Frank. Really, really appreciate it. Jackson then contributed $5. Thank you, Jackson. So we're at $562.92. Only $37.08 left. Any single moms there? I just said people should date you. Guys should date you. That should be worth $38. The problem is that the male to female ratio on YouTube is astounding. It's 95 to 5, something like that. You know, there's very few single moms listening to Yaron Book Show. Unfortunately, there are very few women listening to Yaron Book Show. That's why, you know, having Jennifer on and having Alejandrina on and having who else was on? Having the women that we do have tend to be on the Super Chat and tend to be live. But unfortunately, there's just not a lot of interest in these ideas. There we go. Robert has just done $8 to end. Humor from Steve Martin. I do a bit of charity work. Most of that is with unwed mothers. You know, just helping them get their start. Robert, that could get you in a lot of trouble. That could actually get you banned from YouTube. It could get you demonetized. You got to be careful. Z400 Racer 37. If a woman has a right to choose, what happens when she decides to keep the child and the guy doesn't want it? Is the man financially, morally responsible? No, he's not. He's not responsible. So you'd think he'd want to be, but he is not. It's her choice. Either way, she gets to decide, and she gets to bear the consequences either way. All right, it was a funny joke. I agree with Wanda Friedman. It was a funny joke, but it was a little risque for YouTube, I think. A little risque for YouTube. All right, Alejandrina Day has been made by Joe. He put in the final $25 to put us over $600. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Ron, for getting me not to talk about money during the show and still meeting our goals in spite of that. Thanks to all of you. Have a great time. It's not dinner time. It's sleep time. It's bedtime. Thank you, all of you guys, for supporting the show, for being on the Super Chat, for listening live. Thank you for all of you people who don't listen live, who listen afterwards. It's okay that you listen afterwards. I don't really care. As long as you listen, as long as you support, as long as you give it a thumbs up after you listen, and as long as you share and help promote the show and get the word out there. Get the word out there about the Yaron Book Show. We're going for 30,000 subscribers by the end of the year. We'll see if we can make it. Next show is on Tuesday night. Yaron Book Show. See you guys then. Bye, everybody. Have a great night. Zelmi, thank you.